Welcome to the Multigen Mini Masterclass. Real stories, honest insights, and expert tips on multigenerational living. Whether you're thinking about it, already living it, or just curious, you're in the right place because we're your go-to resource. Let's dive in.
Hello and welcome to the Multi-Gen Mini Masterclass. I am so glad you're here. Today's episode is all about the long game, living multi-generationally, not just for a season or a year, but for decades, and what that can really look like over time. And I'm really excited for today's guest, Judy Hausfeld. Judy and I were introduced through a mutual friend, Trina Woods, who has been here to talk with us another time too. And I'm so glad that she made this connection because Judy has lived multi generationally for more than 20 years.
That's
Um,
right.
Two long, longish chapters of her life, sharing a home with children, parents, spouse, all under one roof. So I'm just so excited to dive into your experience, the beauty, the complexity of this lifestyle, because I think there's going to be such a different take having had such a depth of experience with it. So
Mhm.
thank you so much for being here.
Of course, I'm happy to be here.
You started living multi generationally back in like 2000. Is that right?
That's right. I had a unique experience because in high school, one of my best friends was Macedonian. And so I was over at her house all the time. And many European and ethnic cultures, they have already embraced that experience, right? So, I would, Baba Vasa was always there and the whole family. And I thought that was neat. That isn't really necessarily what would have caused us to do this, but it certainly was neat because I loved seeing how they could interact. And even though, well, they had, the language communications was difficult because the grandparents and the parents had very broken English, but it also brought a lot of laughter.
Oh, I
So,
bet. I
so
think it's
being
really cool that even back, in my day, all of our days before social media, it was really hard to get glimpses into the
that's right.
ways other cultures were doing this, but you're right, this has been
Mhm.
happening for eons in other
Right.
places.
Right, and so we're originally from Columbus, Ohio, and my husband and I moved here in to Atlanta area. We're in a northwest suburb in '86, and then a couple years later, we had our girls, and so when my daughters were 2 and 4, my dad's was a Lutheran pastor, and my mom was a retired kindergarten teacher, and they had decided to take an early retirement and move either to one of the kids' locations, and because of, our area and the economics here, my brother was up in Maryland, which was very high cost of living. Um, my sister was in an area where they didn't have a lot of Lutheran churches, so they ended up moving here, and they got an apartment, and they lived there for about 5 years, and my poor dad would stress out because, we grew up in parsonages, so much of his compensation was the home and everything that was taken care of by the members of the church
Sure.
from except for, like, lawn. But
Sure.
any repairs and we didn't pay any, the mortgage, that's just part of his package. But, each year in those apartments, as with most places, and people know this, doesn't matter, it keeps getting up. They give you a great deal to move in, and then it gets more and more expensive, and he's like, "We just can't afford this." So when Don and I entertained the idea, well, actually, let me back up. So they lived there, and then their rent was exceeding it made more sense to buy a house. So we helped them get a small home, and they paid us a small rent, and so that was wonderful. They were only a couple miles from us, and my kids still did a lot of things with them. But when we decided to look for some land and build property, we asked them, "Would you like to continue in your existing house, or do you want to maybe consider us building a carriage house or an in-law suite?" And there really were very few homes out there that had that set up, especially the kind we needed. And I think I told you in my notes, I said it seemed like they were older, and I'm like, "Gosh, I can't believe they did this." And then I realized they they got moved in with us in 2000, and they were 60 and 65, and I'm 62 now.
Isn't it
So it's
amazing how I have those kind of thoughts too, and it's like, Wow, this is not
Yes.
what I envisioned at all.
That's right, that's right. So they said yes, they would love to, but and this kind of leads into your intro is that my dad was very concerned about us all living together or within the same proximity to make sure that everybody had their privacy and respect. And he didn't want to feel like they were that we couldn't live our life as a young family. So
Sure.
so we found land and we built in 2000 and moved in I think it was February of 2000, and on that particular property they had a small carriage house that was a perfect setup for them. They still both drove. They weren't working. He worked part-time filling in at different churches. And then they volunteered, and it was just a really cute little small 1.5 bedroom house with 2 baths. And we were connected by a portico, like a breezeway that was attached to the main house.
And you
And
built
so
all of this yourself.
correct.
You got to
Mhm.
customize. I that's a what a wonderful gift.
Yes, and so we got to look at, in obviously in doing research for the architect, we had met and I'd gone through a lot of, like, 55 and up, um,
Yep.
subdivisions and looked at the layout and did measurements and tried to figure out how we could get so they really had the same living space as they did in a two-bedroom, two-bath apartment. But then they had a two-car garage, a nice fenced backyard for their dog, and then it attached to us, and so it was really kinda cute to watch because, as we moved in, if I couldn't find one of the kids, I'd always go look at grandma's or call and say, "Are they over there?" Um, and because it was a breezeway, like, during storms, my mom was deathly afraid of storms, so they would run through the breezeway, come down, and go into our basement. Um
Oh,
But it was just so many fun memories, and I'll jump around a little bit because after that house, the house we were in, the girls got out of college and we're like, "This is just too big, we don't need this." We took a break and we looked at renting a place closer into town thinking like we're gonna go into all the bars and restaurants, and then the reality of that is not the case.
right,
But
right.
we still own land next to that larger home. So we decided to go look at that. My, husband at the time, Don, he's like, "We already own this land." Every place we looked for existing ranch homes where we could add on or make an in-law suite living because, of course, at that point, you have moved 13 years. My parents were still in great health, but, we were trying to find something that was attached and not separate. So,
Yep.
we ended up building a second home, and we started that in 14, moved in the fall of 2015, and we lived there all together until, um, I sold the house in, December of 23, and,
So it was
and
you and your parents and the daughters.
mhm, and so the daughters at that time were in college or on their own, but we had another layer of interesting things that happened because my older daughter married, our son-in-law who was in the Air Force, and they had delayed deployment when she was pregnant or when the wedding stuff was going on, but when she was about 3 months pregnant, he found out he was gonna deploy a month
So
after the
she
baby.
didn't want to be alone. Yeah, that's
That's right. So
perfect.
they moved back from Texas. Excuse me. She moved in with us, and so now we have 4 generations in that house. And what made that even more cool is because my youngest or well, the first grandchild, she'll be 8 in September, but she has a relationship with my parents like my girls did, only even exponentially because, here you have a little 2 or 3-year-old because they lived with us for several years. She would walk over and we'd already have breakfast and things like that, and then she'd walk over through this arrangement was we are attached by a laundry room with doors on each side.
Cool.
So,
Okay.
she would have breakfast, and then she'd wander across, and then we couldn't find her, and she'd be sitting at my mom and dad's breakfast table, eating breakfast with them again. So and the dogs went back and forth, so it was like community dogs. Allie had 2 dogs, and then we had a dog, and then when Jared got home, they moved back in with us till they can find a house, and so it happened again on their 2nd child. He had to do training, and he had to leave again and was gone about 3 weeks until the little brother was born. So Allie moved back in with us. She closed up her house and she's like, "I'm not doing this alone." And she's a school teacher, so she needed this extra set of hands. And so yeah, so we have a pretty unique glimpse of it from
What a
2000.
powerful thing for your parents
Oh, that my mom, I saw her.
specifically to get to
That's right.
have just the your daughters going back and forth and all of that in the 90s, and
Right,
then to
right.
have their great grandchildren coming and sitting and
Mhm.
having breakfast. And how special is that?
It was amazing, and my father passed away in 22, but my mom,
Oh, I'm
in a
sorry.
home on oh, thank you. He lived a long life. I don't have any regrets. He didn't. He was 92. But, when I sold that house, I found a home here that I'm talking from that had a master suite and then a junior master suite on the main floor, and it's basically set up as a ranch, and then the basement is when the kids come over. Like, they'll come over periodically, and it's not unusual for them. Probably because of our past experiences too.
Sure.
They wanna come over and we'll play cards and play games, and then they go downstairs to sleep, and in the morning, they go knock and wake on grandma up from her place, so
Oh,
it's
that's
a really
wonderful.
it is, it's very special.
So your mom, I'm sure that has been such a blessing for her, with losing your dad, to have this built-in support system
That's right.
at arm's reach already
Mhm.
there, to not have to be
Right.
reactive, but
Mhm.
you're just to support each other as this is
Right.
happening.
And it yeah, and at the suggestion of my sister after my husband and I got divorced, and we are good friends and we get along better now, and that's a great setup for the kids and all the family members. But I had moved my parents into a senior living apartment that was only like 3 miles from our home.
Okay.
And so then after he died, it was wonderful that she could come back and stay with me, and then when I decided to sell that house and find this current one, she's now only a mile from me. So I'll be picking her up this afternoon to come back and, do Good Friday services, and then tomorrow the kids come over to swim and get all the Easter fun prep, and then Sunday everybody will be there. So yes, it's a very unique experience, and as you decide to ask questions, I can fill you on some of the pros and cons. We were actually very lucky because, my husband always loved, and he still does, loved my parents, and they were very easy to get along with, very laid back. So we didn't have really many issues, um, of, like, we need our privacy. We all kind of respected that.
Well, it sounds
So
like your parents were very cognizant of that from day one, with your
that's right.
dad being, you're a young family, we need to have, and you
Mhm.
had separate homes from the very beginning, which
That's right.
with our experience, that was we knew from the beginning of exploring this option that we needed two separate
Mhm.
homes, including kitchens, front doors, parking areas,
Yeah,
because we are individual families. My parents
that's right.
are fully functional, living
Yeah,
their
Trina's told you
dream.
all about them, how
Yeah, they're
wonderful
living
they
their dream, we're living our dream, and we're combining dreams. But I do think that it's great that you guys all went in with the same goal.
Yes, the same expectations, and even when we were connected homes, they had their own it was basically the same setup of their house, actually a little bit larger, but we are attached by the laundry room, so the only room we shared, um,
Right.
publicly was the laundry, which was beneficial for me because my mom loves to do laundry, so
How
she had her own, like,
blessing.
washing her own
That's
wash
wonderful.
business.
Well, talk to me, navigating a divorce that you mentioned. How I can imagine that that adds an entire layer of complexity,
It
having
did,
this sort of, yeah, more people involved.
right, except for that, at the time, we were separated in 21. We got separated in 21, and then he moved out in 21, I'm sorry. The divorce was final in 22. Um, and, you always have a little bit of adjustment of moving apart and of not seeing each other on a regular basis. That's what preempted me to and like I said, at my sister's, strong suggestions. She was worried about my independence and trying to learn a new lifestyle for me, yet not tied down. And at the same time, my father was starting to slip in his memory. We were very blessed up until the end, but there were times when Don was living with me, he had an office in the basement. And so, very typically, one of us would be home almost all the time. And if they would go out, I did have the little necklaces for them because at that point, he was 91. And I was mostly concerned because my mom was and still is in good physical health for her age and everything and mentally. But when he moved out and I would go on with my life of volunteering or helping with the grandkids or doing different things, it was a lot. I was so concerned about them being by themselves, and especially if something would have happened to my mother and my father.
Right.
I don't know that he would get confused, like, all of a sudden of how to operate the cell phone or where's my number, and I had the little fall necklaces for them, but I was constantly worried that they didn't have that, somebody right there at their fingertips. So that's
Sure.
what led us to, just they lived together 6 months there before he passed away, and that also is a great transition if you're doing this kind of family lifestyle that we gave them the choice, do you wanna have, they didn't need really nursing care, but they need to have like a, they call it like a parent's helper
Yeah.
or angel companion, if you
Yep.
will. Someone that will come in, check on them, help if help is needed. And my dad said, I think I would not live comfortably having a stranger there looking at me constantly. And so, and my sister didn't want a stranger on my side of the house. So that's what led us into a great transition to move them both at the same time while they were still able to do things together. They weren't driving, but they could do things together and go down to the dining hall and whatnot. And that was a wonderful, and I would encourage people to think about that. Had there been a more advanced case of dementia or Alzheimer's that people go through, I would have had to bring someone in because you just can't. We had their second place was all set up handicap with all the grab bars and
Mhm.
things, but you still don't have the pull cords if somebody falls. So, so you do kind of have to have those plans in place. The second home, the second bedroom was set up when we built it. We made sure that that room, if it would have been needed, had plenty of space for example, like a hospital bed and all the equipment that goes with it, and electronics that could be mounted, like if you were in a hospital room, and it would allow the other parent who was in good shape would still have their own bedroom and bathroom.
Right.
So that's something also when you're doing the plans, depending on the age and the need of the parent, so when they first moved in at 60 and 65, they
You're
didn't
not
need
thinking
it.
about, yeah, you're not.
And 13 years later, they didn't necessarily need it, but we saw that coming down the pipeline, because then they're like in their 80s. So that was another huge issue. And I think on both homes, I researched and we kind of looked at floor plans, measured, trying to see where they wouldn't be overwhelmed with their space in too big of a house. Because
Right.
sometimes if you build it and you do an extension, then they don't feel like they have their own cozy space.
Right.
So it wasn't an issue with the first home because they had their own home and we just happened to be attached. But they had their own driveway. Well, we shared the driveway, excuse me, but they had their own garage, their own door.
Right.
And also with this new house, the garages were shared, but they had their own front door. And then we met up. Both houses had back doors that went out on the little pool terrace area.
Mhm.
So it was really cute because we had screen porches that we could wave across to each other, or
I love it.
he'd
I
say,
love it.
"Judy, I can't get my TV to work. Come fix it for me."
Oh, that's see, and that's the kind of thing that we're building with our experience too, is that shared outdoor living, that shared, I mean, you can live independently and feel connected at the same time. And I
That's
think
right.
that's the picture that you paint is so harmonious.
Be sure to tune in for part 2 of this incredible conversation where we dive deep into the perks of multi-gen living, the importance of personal space, and Judy's top advice for folks going down this rabbit hole. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.